My ex-wife, 49 female, and I, 52 male, split several years ago when my children were 9, 12, and 14. It was a relatively amicable breakup. Nothing was terribly wrong, we just weren't in love anymore, and we have remained friends since. Of course, this was hard on the children, but we did everything possible to make it easier on them, and I believe they handled it very well, and had as happy and as stable next few years as they could have. I didn't really date or seek any sort of romantic connection for a long time after the divorce. But 3 years on, I met M and fell pretty deeply in love. M is a man. I don't know if I'm gay or bi or pan or what. All I know is that I am happy and in love, and I have been now for the past 9 years. That's not to say I wasn't happy before. In the 3 years before the divorce and meeting M, I had my children for 3 days a week and loved every second spent with them. 6 months after M and I became an item, I thought it was time to tell the children I was seeing someone. I thought it was still too early to introduce M, but I felt like I was lying to them by not telling them that I had someone so important in my life. Their mother had had a new boyfriend for about a year at this point, and they all liked him, so I wasn't too nervous. So I told them that I had started seeing somebody. At first, the reaction was largely positive. The eldest and youngest were happy for me. The middle child, D, now at this stage 15, seemed relatively pleased for me. Next, I said that what I was about to tell them may be a bit of a shock, but the person I was seeing was a man. I had expected them to be surprised, but I wasn't too nervous. We had raised them in a very liberal household and had always emphasized the importance of being anti-R, S, homophobic, etc. We are from a quite diverse area and have friends who are LGBTQ+, who the children have all met. The response from my eldest and youngest was as I expected. Taken aback at first, but ultimately happy for me. D, however, said nothing. I thought, okay, he is just processing it. It's a lot to take in, and that's fair. I said if anyone wanted to talk about it more, to let me know, and we could. The next day, they went back to their mom's house. D had been very quiet for the remainder of his time at my place. I was a little worried and tried to assure the kids that they would always come first, before any partner, etc. Again, eldest and youngest seemed totally fine. D, however, much less so. 4 days pass, and the kids are due to arrive at my place, but only the eldest and the youngest show up. I asked where D is, and I remember that they just looked at each other uncomfortably. I panicked, asking what was wrong with D. Eventually, my eldest came out with it. When they got to their mother's house, D has told his mom about M, called me a F, and said he never wanted to see me again. It felt like I had been shot in the chest. My ex-wife knew about M before the kids did and was happy for me. Apparently, she had told D off for talking about me that way and tried to convince him to come, but he had refused. Over the next few months, I called him. I went over time and time again. He refused to answer the phone or see me, so I left messages begging and pleading with him to change his mind, to talk to me. I told him I would leave M if he wanted me to, but I couldn't help the way I feel. I spoke to his siblings, my ex-wife. They told me they had tried and tried, but D was adamant. My other children were incredibly upset and seemed to think a lot less of D. After 6 months of trying, I gave in. It was the most miserable I had ever felt, but I knew I couldn't force my now 16-year-old son to see me. And I didn't want to have to force him. All I could think is, where did I go wrong? I hadn't seen M the entire time in the hopes this would encourage my son to change his mind. But luckily, M had been patient and understanding and still wanted to see me after all that time. We used to do birthdays, Christmases, school events, etc. as a family, even after the divorce. But D refused to go if I was there. So, eventually, I stopped attending these things. I still saw my other children 3 days a week, and they eventually met M and thankfully love him. Every year on D's birthday and Christmas, and a few other times, I would try to contact him again. Every year he would ignore me. He blocked me on social media, but I would sometimes see him sharing homophobic posts and YouTube videos, as well as some alt-right videos, when my other children were using social media around me. A few days ago, I reached out again. This time, he finally responded. My heart leapt, and then I read the message. "Duck you, F. You will never be my father." I broke down into tears. But then, for the first time, I was filled with pure anger. D is now 24 years old. According to my ex-wife, he has a good job, a nice flat, and a girlfriend. He is a grown man now. I decided enough is enough. I replied and said, "Well, a homophobe is no son of mine. I will not try to contact you again. I am removing you from my will, and you can consider yourself disowned as my son. I have since made arrangements to adjust my will." He hasn't contacted me, but my ex-wife said D is angry that I intend to remove him from my will. A couple of days have passed, and I have felt nothing but inner turmoil. After all, he is my son, and my job is to always be there for him. Part of me wants to contact again and say, "I take it back. I'll always be here if he changes his mind." But honestly, I am exhausted, and I feel I was justified in what I said and in removing him from my will. Did I make the right choice, or should I try and take it back? To answer a few questions. I only brought up my will in the first place because it's the only way I can think of to really disown my son. It is more symbolic than anything. I don't think I will have much to leave. I have my house, plus a small amount in savings, which would be a nice amount in one go, but we're not talking tens of thousands when split between 3 children, including if they sold the house, especially if there are grandchildren and charity donations, etc. My other 2 children are a boy, eldest, and a girl, youngest. I made it clear to all my children that I loved my wife and what we had was real. I didn't meet M or anyone romantically for 3 years after, and I believe it was clear that my S wasn't the reason for our divorce. But some of you made the point that maybe this wasn't clear and that it was why D took it so hard. This is something I have considered, but maybe not enough. My ex-wife seems to think D has been radicalized by things he has seen on the internet. She is still in regular contact with him, and they have a very normal mother-son relationship, but I think she finds his beliefs very difficult, and my other children do too. I do think I should provide for my children, but I worry how he would put the money to use. I don't want my money contributing to anything harmful, even after I'm gone. I may try and set something up so that if he has children, I can leave something for them. Upon further reflection, I think the mention of writing him out of my will was a last-ditch effort to get some reaction from him. Something to make him want to see me. I can't cut him out forever. Kids don't just become this way. Somewhere along the line, I, or my wife and I, messed up and allowed this to happen. I think I am going to get in contact one last time, tell them that I love him and always will, and wish nothing but the best for him. But until he can treat me like a human being, I can't have him in my life. Growing up, I thought I was the luckiest kid in the world to have my family. Sure, my older twin sisters by 7 years and I didn't get along much, but I always linked that to them being girls and so much older than me, not to mention the weird twin thing. But I still loved them. My mom was a wonderful woman who was always there for me. And my dad was there for me too, but he was a bit emotionally distant. I always thought that was because he was kinda old school macho, wanted me to be tough. I was so wrong, and I'll never forget the day the truth kicked me in the nuts and told me my days were numbered. 10.5 years ago, the day after my 17th birthday party, my dad and mom came into my room with the most serious of faces. I thought Grandma died or something. My dad looked at my mom and asked, "Well?" My mom just shook her head and looked down. Crap, did Grandma and Grandpa die? At the time, I never thought there could be something worse than a death in the family. I was wrong. So my dad looked me right in the eyes and said, to the best of my ability to recall, "I want you to understand this isn't a joke, a prank, or anything else like that. What I'm about to say is as serious and truthful as it will ever get. Do you understand?" I nodded. 17 years and 9 months ago, your mother went on a trip with her sister Sally to Las Vegas, and she had an affair. He started, and it felt like the bottom of my gut fell out. I wanted to ask what, but nothing came out. My dad, because that's how I still thought of him, continued, "You were a result of that affair. The only thing we know about your real father is that his name was Steve, and your mother only knew him for a few hours before she slept with him." My mom was crying when I glanced at her, but Dad's voice was always a commanding presence growing up, so my attention snapped right back to him. "Your half-sisters, Ouch, that hurt. We're 7 at the time, and your mother confessed the affair immediately when she got home. She begged me to take her back, and I agreed. A month later, we found out she was pregnant. There was still a chance you could be mine, but I demanded a paternity test once you were born. 8 months later, you were born. They did the test, and you weren't mine. What was I doing during all this? Sitting there in shocked disbelief and silence. My mother was sitting next to my dad, face in her hands, crying, but Dad wasn't done yet. Now, I love your mother, so I promised the woman I love that I would give her son a safe and loving home until he was an adult, but then he would no longer be welcome in my home. Which means that when you turn 18, you're out. I won't pay another red cent towards your life. That includes college. I told your mom she had until this day to tell you, and she hasn't. That's why we're here. Do you understand what I've said? Silence. I expect an answer. Yes. Mark, that was my dad's name, stood up and walked towards the door of my room, and I blurted, "Does this mean you don't love me anymore, Dad?" "I never loved you, and my name is Mark." Mom tried to comfort me, but I screamed that I hated her or some stupid BS. She told me she loved me, then left my room too. I cried like a little bee until I fell asleep. The next day, Mark informed me that I was still responsible for all my chores around the house and told me to get off my butt and get to work. So I did. I was terrified of being kicked out. At dinner, yes, we all ate dinner together, even then, Mark told me I needed to get some part-time jobs to start saving money unless I wanted to be homeless. I'll skip over this part a bit. The rest of summer vacation was filled with searching for a part-time job and usually working 3 part-time jobs. Sleep is for the weak. My girlfriend at the time dumped me because I wasn't spending any time with her. I didn't tell my friends or her about it. I'm still not sure why. Maybe pride, maybe shame, maybe not knowing at that age how to remotely explain the situation. I used some of my summer money to buy a crappy but running car for like $600. It was an old VW Bug that needed to be push-started most days, and it didn't have AC, which was a problem in the South. I returned the car Mark purchased for me when I got my license. I remember he looked at me, how he looked at me before when he was proud of me, but it was only a fleeting moment. When school started back up, I realized it was going to cut into my money-earning endeavors, so I studied up on getting my GED, and had it by the time December rolled around. My mother, who was a stay-at-home mom, gave me around $1,000 for Christmas. Mark gave me some windshield wipers for my rust bucket, which was more than I expected, to be honest. And my half-sisters? They got me a couple of nice dress shirts. I'd probably never go anyplace to wear them, though. 7 months until the big 18, and I was done with high school. College wasn't going to happen, so I needed a trade. I had done some gopher work at an electrician, so I asked him if he'd train me and pay me while I got my certs. His sons didn't want to uphold electrician and sons' tradition of getting zapped for a living, so he agreed. Life at the house became pretty terrible. I basically slept there, and occasionally I'd ask my mom about the situation when Mark was gone. What I learned is that Steve was very attractive, very charming, and my mom was very drunk. It didn't help that my Aunt Sally very much encouraged the affair and Steve, which explained why I had an aunt that I'd literally never met. Mom had tried to find out who he was, but there wasn't much to go on. The months marched on. June hit, and then my birthday. There wasn't a party. Mark literally brought boxes into my room and told me to start packing. I had already bought 2 duffel bags and dumped all my clothes and personal effects into them. I took a shower, and then I took my laptop and my MP3 player and was out the door. I'd already gotten a cheap phone with texting so I could keep in touch with work, and I also gave my mom my number. I'd managed to save enough to get a tiny 1-bedroom in a crappy part of town, and that was my life. Thanksgiving rolled around. There was no invitation for me. I had a bologna sandwich. Most of my friends had gone off to college, and what they say is true. Out of sight, out of mind. Christmas was bad. I called my mom and asked if I could come see her. She said we could meet somewhere. Tears, I love yous, do you need anything? Don't cry, Mom. I love you too. No, I'm okay. On my 19th birthday, my mom didn't call. I tried to do a stupid thing. The ceiling fan broke, so I got hammered and called it a night. The next day, I walked into a church and talked to the pastor. He told me that what Mark did was unconscionable. I kinda understood Mark's position though, but that I had to focus on the good things going on in my life, which was basically work. So, pastor-approved workaholism life is the life for me. I went back to talk to the pastor a few more times to talk when the dark feelings came. He never tried to recruit me, though. I always appreciated that. From that point on, work was all I cared about. If I did my job and stayed to myself, I'd be okay. If Mom called me, she called me. If not, oh, what has to be done at work? At this point, I also started looking into plumbing certs. So when I wasn't working as an electrician, I was going to school for plumbing. That healthy lifestyle lasted for 2 years. On my 21st birthday, my coworkers took me out to a restaurant and our server was, then 21 female, now 27 female, Beth. There was something about Beth. There still is. At the end of the evening, I asked her out, not to a steakhouse where she worked. And we're still together, and married. To this day, it'd be a safe bet to say she knows everything. We married at 23. I invited my family, including Mom, my sisters, and Mark. Hopeful? No, hopeful. Mom came. My half-sisters, who now knew the truth, did not. Mark? Do you have to ask? No, he didn't show up. I got to dance with my mom. Reminded me of when I was a little boy and she would let me stand on her shoes and dance with me in the living room or kitchen. Beth, then 24, gave me 2 beautiful children, a son and a daughter, twins, strangely enough. Mom saw them. No one else from my family did. I know I've not mentioned it yet, but we, Mark, Mom, and I, still live in the same small city. So, on occasion, I would see Mark or Mom out and about town. I remember seeing Mark shortly after the birth of my kids and thinking, he looks thinner. Shortly after that, I didn't see Mark around town. What I didn't know was that it was his first bout with pancreatic cancer. He survived that time. 3 years later, he didn't. I know why my mom didn't come meet for our usual Christmas visit, or why she hadn't been around to see my kids. Mark was dying, and he finally lost his battle on Monday evening. A part of me is sad that the only man I ever knew as a father is gone. I don't believe that he never loved me. You don't spend 17 years raising a son to be a good man without having love in your heart for them. I'm so angry at him. How could he not know after everything he did for me that I loved him, and knowing the truth would only make me love him more? He didn't have to take care of me. He could have dumped my mom, but he didn't. He stayed. He taught me to ride a bike and fish and drive. But maybe it was all just lies. I wonder if his obit will say he is survived by a son. His memorial is on Saturday. What does a person do in this situation? I don't even know what I'm asking. Should I go? Should I talk to my half-sisters? Try to make peace with them?